Miyamoto Musashi did not talk about discipline like a motivational speaker, because he lived it in fights where losing meant death. He was born in 1584 and lived in a Japan shaped by war. Tradition says he fought more than 60 formal duels and never lost one. By around age 21, he had developed a two-sword style later called Niten Ichi-ryu. What makes Musashi powerful today is not only that he won. It is that he later wrote down a system that tries to make discipline feel automatic instead of forced. That system lives mainly in two short texts. One is the Book of Five Rings, written in 1645 near the end of his life. The other is the Dokudo, a list of final precepts dictated shortly before he died in the cave called Raigando. Together, these texts say something simple and severe. Real discipline starts when right action becomes part of your character, not something you wait to feel motivated to do. Musashi's Book of Five Rings is divided into earth, water, fire, wind, and void. He used the five elements as a way to explain how strategy works from foundation to action to deeper understanding. The Earth Book is where he lays down the base. There he compares strategy to building a house, because solid work needs structure before style. At the end of that section, he gives 9 ground rules. These rules are short, plain, and far less dramatic than most people expect. He says, do not think dishonestly. He says, the way is in training. He says, become acquainted with every art and know the ways of all professions. He says, distinguish gain and loss in worldly matters, develop intuitive judgment, notice what cannot be seen, pay attention even to trifles, and do nothing useless. That list sounds almost ordinary, and that is exactly why it is so strong. Musashi is not asking for fancy inspiration. He is building a mind that checks itself through honesty, practice, awareness, and rejection of waste. Take the first rule, do not think dishonestly. If you lie to yourself about your effort, your skill, or your weakness, no training plan can save you. A dishonest mind protects the ego and blocks improvement before the sword is even lifted. Now take the second rule, the way is in training. Musashi does not place mastery in wishing, talking, or waiting for the right mood. He places it in repetition, which means the person who keeps returning wins ground even before results are visible. That is how discipline becomes automatic. You stop asking whether you feel like training and start treating training as the place where your identity is formed. Then Musashi widens the frame. He says to become acquainted with every art and to know the ways of all professions. This sounds strange if you only see him as a fighter. But Musashi later became a painter, calligrapher, sculptor, and observer of wider human behavior. He believed narrow skill can become brittle. When you study many arts and professions, you learn timing, structure, rhythm, patience, and human motive from more than one angle. That wider view helps you adapt instead of freezing when the situation changes. His next rules push practical judgment. He says to distinguish gain and loss in worldly matters and to develop intuitive understanding for everything. In simple words, learn to see what helps, what hurts, and what looks good but drains your life. That fits modern discipline perfectly. A person with automatic discipline does not only choose good goals. That person also removes bad habits, time traps, and ego games that quietly steal energy. Musashi then says to perceive things which cannot be seen. This is not magic. It means noticing patterns, motives, weak points, moods, and timing before they become obvious to everybody else. He follows that with a rule people often skip. Pay attention even to trifles. Small details tell the truth. In training, a tiny posture error grows into a major weakness. In modern life, a tiny delay repeated daily becomes a ruined schedule, a weaker body, or a broken promise. Then he ends the 9 rules with a hard filter. Do nothing which is of no use. That does not mean life must become joyless. It means stop feeding what does not serve your real path. Musashi is asking for clean attention. The water book shows how this inner discipline should feel in action. Water changes shape without losing its nature, and Musashi wanted the swordsman to become like that. He writes that your spiritual bearing and strategy should not differ from normal life. In fighting, and in everyday life, he says, you should be determined though calm. That line matters because automatic discipline is not panic, strain, or loud self-control. It is quiet steadiness that remains the same across pressure and routine. Musashi also teaches 5 attitudes of swordsmanship: upper, middle, lower, right side, and left side. The point is not to worship one perfect stance. The point is to know many positions so you are never trapped by one habit. That lesson applies to work, training, and self-control. If your discipline works only under perfect conditions, it is not discipline yet. The Fire Book moves into battle. There Musashi talks about timing, momentum, rhythm, and reading the breakdown of the enemy. He even says timing can be studied through music and dance because rhythm governs more than war. He describes ways of forestalling the enemy, including direct pressure and feigned weakness followed by attack. In modern terms, discipline is not only pushing harder. Sometimes the smart move is to change pace, hide intent, or strike at the exact moment resistance weakens. The Wind Book is Musashi's critique of other schools. In Japanese, the character for wind can also mean style, and he uses that to attack rigid systems. He believed many schools became too attached to one stance, one move, or one signature method. That made them predictable. For Musashi, a specialty becomes a weakness when it turns into identity worship. This matters today because many people become prisoners of their own self-image. They want to be seen as grinders, perfectionists, or natural talents, and then they cannot adapt when life changes. Musashi would call that bad strategy. The final section, the Void Book, is the shortest and the strangest. He writes that in the void, there is virtue and no evil, that wisdom and principle exist there, and spirit is nothingness. This sounds abstract, but the practical message is sharp. When the mind is no longer crowded by fear, vanity, desire, and confusion, action becomes direct. The trained person stops arguing with reality and starts meeting it clearly. That is one reason modern readers connect Musashi with discipline. He is not merely saying work harder. He is saying clear away the inner friction that keeps effort from becoming natural. His own life gave these words unusual authority. His most famous duel was against Sasaki Kojiro on April 13, 1612, on Ganryu Island. Sasaki was said to be Japan's finest swordsman and master of a very long blade linked to the swallow cut. Musashi arrived late on purpose, knowing the delay would irritate him and disturb his mind. When the duel began, Sasaki cut through Musashi's headband without drawing blood. Musashi then struck with an extra-long wooden sword and fatally wounded him. That story is brutal, but it also reveals Musashi's method. He used timing, psychology, and preparation so well that he could make victory begin before the first full exchange. Later in life, Musashi stepped away from death duels and served the Hosokawa lords. He painted, wrote, and reflected, which shows his idea of mastery grew larger than combat. Then in 1645, as illness closed in, he composed the Dakodo. The title is often translated as The Way of Walking Alone. These 21 precepts push detachment, self-command, and freedom from dependence on comfort, praise, pleasure, and possession. He says, do not regret what you have done, never envy others, do not act in haste, and always train in the way of strategy. He also says, think of yourself lightly, and the world heavily. That line cuts straight into ego. A person who is obsessed with being important wastes energy protecting image instead of doing the work. Musashi also warns against being swayed by affection, complaint, pity, comfort, and self-gratification. He is not saying love or shelter are evil. He is saying dependence makes you weak when those things control your decisions. In his model, automatic discipline appears when your direction no longer waits for outside approval or perfect emotion. That is why his rules still travel into business, sports, military training, and productivity writing. People see in Musashi a man who linked action to character so tightly that excuses had little room left. The school he founded, Hyoho Niten Ichiryu, still survives today through a long documented line of teachers. So these were not just beautiful last words from a dying warrior. They became a living tradition. The deepest lesson Musashi offers is that discipline is often made by subtraction. Remove useless action, remove self-deception, remove attachment to comfort, remove dependence on praise, and good action becomes easier to repeat. Then the mind does not need a speech before each task. It already knows where it stands. That is what makes discipline feel automatic. It stops being a project you start each Monday and becomes the shape of your daily life. If you want the next video, watch the one on how samurai strategy can be turned into a modern routine for work, fitness, and focus.